Geek Therapy Radio.
I know what you're thinking. We were going down. I could feel us sinking. Then I came around, and everyone I'd loved before flashed before my eyes, and nothing mattered anymore. I looked into the sky. Well, I wanted something better, man. I wished for something new. And I wanted something beautiful. I wished for something true. Been looking for a reason, man. Something to lose. When the wheels come down. When the wheels come down. When the wheels touch ground. When the wheels touch ground. It's all over, there's another round for you. When the wheels come down, when the wheels come down.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and today we are going to get a little bit specific with the topic. I'm going to try not to dance around and go from rabbit trail to rabbit trail, but as you know, I might here. But specifically today, I wanted to talk about the Douglas DC-3. Yep, today we're talking about a specific airplane, and one of my all-time favorite airplanes. As a matter of fact, when you close your eyes, don't do this if you're driving, but when you imagine a stereotypical airplane, odds are most of you will picture the Douglas DC-3. It has twin engines on the wings. It was a popular airliner back in the actually 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It's actually still in use today, but we're going to talk specifically about it. We're going to learn all sorts of fascinating things about the Douglas DC-3, especially if you're into airplanes and maybe haven't spent a whole lot of time researching the DC-3 for some reason. Maybe you're just an airplane layperson and you recognize the Douglas DC-3. Maybe you didn't know it was called the Douglas DC-3. Maybe you aren't that fascinated by airplanes, but you know what? Maybe you'll be fascinated by airplanes, at least the Douglas DC-3, by the end of this. So let's dive right in, shall we? Because I'm going to geek out about this hard. It is one of my favorite planes to fly in Flight Simulator. I've seen DC-3s in real life. I've never been in a DC-3 in real life, unfortunately. It's something I would like to do. It's something on my bucket list. And luckily for me and for all of us living in this world right now, even in 2020, DC-3s are still in active service in one form or another. But we'll get into that as we go along here. The Douglas DC-3. DC, by the way, stands for Douglas Commercial because the DC-3 was built for commercial purposes and airliner purposes and passenger purposes and cargo purposes and commercial purposes. Thus, the Douglas DC-3. Its first flight was December 17th, 1935. As of recording, that is 85 years ago. It was officially introduced to market for sale in 1936, however, just a few months after its first maiden flight in December 17th, 1935. It was produced off and on, which we'll get into, until 1950, and the base cost was about $1.5 million in 2020 money. Now, $1.5 million is a lot of money. There's no way to get around that fact. 1.5 mil, 1.5 large, is a lot of money. However, in terms of aircraft, especially medium-sized passenger aircraft, the DC-3 could hold a few dozen passengers, which we'll get into in a moment as well. So $1.5 million, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, and I'm not well versed in every single aircraft that has ever existed, but it's hard. I would imagine it's hard to come by a passenger aircraft. And what I mean is more than just 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, 7 people, for $1.5 million. The 737s that you fly to go see grandma in cost tens of millions of dollars easy, if not a few $100 million. Airplanes are expensive. So the fact that the DC-3 cost $1.5 million in 2020 money, that means it was something like $70,000-ish back in the late 30s, was quite a bargain. The DC-3 is a tail dragger, which means its tail drags along the ground, and when it's not in flight and just sitting still on the ground, it means its nose pitches way up into the air. While it is a tail dragger, it does have rear landing gear, so it is resting on an actual wheel to help it move around, so it doesn't actually physically drag a tail in the dirt or along the runway. There is a wheel back there, but it is otherwise known as a tail dragger. A matter of fact, when passengers had to board the DC-3, it was kind of an odd thing because the short stairwell went up to the rear hatch, and if you were seated in one of the front seats, you'd have to walk up quite a decent incline, to get to, almost like stairs but without stairs, just an incline to get to your front seats. And it's funny to imagine some, rich fuddy-duddy lady with her fur scarf and fur coat having to make a little hike up an incline. I'm sure she had some help. It's funny to imagine. My wife is in the back of the room right now looking at me, but it's funny to imagine the hoity-toity types having to get a little sweaty. There's no air conditioner in there. Also, sitting on the tarmac, really hot, wearing fur. Not that the DC-3 was only relegated to rich people. It wasn't. It actually made air travel all the more affordable. So it was powered by, in most forms, 2 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp radial piston engines. Let's talk about engines just for a second. The little rabbit trail we're going to get off to here is the 3 main type of engines used in aircraft. You have radial piston engines, as we're talking about here with the DC-3. You have jet turbine engines. Those are what are on common jet airliners that you see every time you go flying on the 737, 747, 787, A320, all sorts of different airplanes. Those are the big turbine engines we're all familiar with. There's also, the third most popular are called turboprops. Those are jet turbine engines mated to a prop shaft and a propeller. And through gear reduction, it spins the propeller at the proportionate speed instead of at whatever speed the jet engine spins at, so the propeller doesn't fly to pieces. But anyways, turboprop, traditional jet engine, and piston engines. And the 3 differences between those engines are this. Jet engines and turboprop, they operate essentially the same way. They suck in huge amounts of air through many, many rows of turbine fins that spin faster and faster. It's ignited with the exhaust, with the fuel, and the fuel actually shooting out the back end helps speed up the rest of the turbines. It's like a reciprocating process. The more fuel that it's shooting out the back, the more thrust, the faster the front of the engine spins. It's really quite incredible, and they operate most efficiently. All you need to take away from that is that jet engines and turboprop engines, for that matter, operate most efficiently at higher altitudes. So 30,000 feet, 35,000, 40,000 feet, 45,000 feet. That's where jet engines and turboprops are most efficient. Piston engine aircraft, whether it's a flat 4-cylinder like is in a Cessna, I believe a Cessna is a flat 4-cylinder for the most part, or radial piston engines, they operate much like your car engine does. So it has pistons that go up and down. There's spark plugs, and it sucks in air through the air intake, and it has to mix with the fuel. And there's an explosion with the spark plug, which pushes the piston down, which turns a crankshaft, which turns a propeller, or turns the wheels in your car. That's all fine and dandy and great. But just like your car driving up a very tall mountain, you lose power and efficiency the higher up you go. The engine doesn't operate as well, which is why Back to the DC-3, the service ceiling was about 23,000 feet, 23,200 feet. That is about the upper limits at which the airplane was still reasonably maneuverable, still within its operational envelope, and the engine wasn't completely, the piston engine, radial piston engine, wasn't completely starved of precious oxygen to explode in the cylinder and make the engine work. So while jet engines operate 30,000, 40,000 feet, the DC-3 was limited to around just over 20,000 feet due to the type of engine that it had. All right, moving right on, the cruise speed of the Douglas DC-3, was 207 miles per hour. The top speed was about 230, 240 miles per hour. So for some perspective, the jet airliner you fly to grandma's house in will do 500 miles an hour all day. I think usually they're cruising around 450 or so, 400, between 400 and 500 miles per hour. So the cruise speed of the DC-3 was about half that at 207 miles per hour at a service ceiling of about 23,000 feet. It could hold up to 32 passengers or about 6,000 pounds of cargo. The DC-3 was very versatile. It can be configured in many different configurations, whether you're making food drops to Africa, or you're flying passengers to Aspen, Colorado for a ski trip. It was very configurable, that DC-3. It had a range, depending on that payload, of about 1,500 miles. And let me scroll down here in my notes. So a range of 1,500 miles, that's nothing to sneeze at, and you're not going to get 1,500 miles completely weighed down to capacity of payload or passengers. And you can think about it this way. Driving around in your normal automobile, let's say you fill up your car with 12 gallons of gasoline, and on that 12 gallons of gasoline, you get 300 miles or whatever out of your gas tank, out of a full gas tank. Now, load your car up with 4 more passengers and towing a 2,000-pound trailer, there's no way on that same 12 gallons of gas you are ever going to approach anything near 300 miles to that same amount of gas. It's the same thing with airplanes. The heavier the airplane is loaded up with passengers and cargo, the less range you get. So the range of about 1,500 miles varies heavily depending on how packed the DC-3 was. The DC-3 was actually one of the first airliners to make passenger travel profitable. And this was because the DC-3 was reliable and easy to maintain, aka very cheap to operate, versus other aircraft of the day. And it could fly passengers across the United States, actually, in 15 to 17 hours with 3 refueling stops. 15 to 17 hours because it depends basically which way across the United States you're going. When you're flying from the West Coast to the East Coast, you will fly faster. You'll get there in about 15 hours coast to coast going from west to east. Versus going from east to west, it takes 2 hours more because you're battling the headwind. Picture the jet stream. When you're watching the weather report and it shows the direction of the jet stream, it's going from west to east. It's going from California, from winding through the United States, and then it goes out over the East Coast somewhere across the Atlantic Ocean. So that is the direction that air moves generally across the surface of the Earth. So when you're flying west to east, you have that tailwind, you're going with the atmosphere of the Earth, so you arrive at the destination all the faster because you have that tailwind. Versus going the other way, east to west, you are pushing against the natural rotation of the Earth and the wind in the atmosphere, so you're actually slower and less efficient. Bottom line is, whichever way you're going, you're up to, in the DC-3, it's up to 3 refueling stops because if you might remember, I said the range of 1,500 miles. You might be thinking to yourself, well, the United States is only about 3,300 miles across, so why? If you're getting 1,500 miles, that's 4,500 miles total. No, remember, when it's weighed down with passengers, your mileage may vary. So you usually had about 3 refueling stops going across the United States, and at minimum, it would take about 15 hours. I know that sounds crazy because now you can get from Los Angeles to New York City in about 5 or 6 hours. About a third of the time, but that makes sense because jet airliners are over twice as fast as a Douglas DC-3. Additionally, it made international travel all the more possible. Yes, before the Douglas DC-3, you could certainly travel to Europe, but it wasn't a regular occurrence. I'm just using that as an example. From the United States to Europe, it wasn't a regular thing. The DC-3 made it a more regular thing by way of Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and Ireland. You basically have to make these stops to refuel on your way to Europe. It just but that's still, even despite how many stops you have to make along the way, flying above the northern Atlantic Ocean, it still put international travel within reach of the relatively average person. Okay, so getting back to the subject of production. Civilian production of the DC-3 ended in 1942 with a total thereabouts of about 607 aircraft altogether by the time 1942 rolled around. However, war tends to do this. During World War II, military versions were produced to the tune of over 16,000 units, most famously in the form of the C-47 Skytrain, also known as the Dakota in British RAF service. So, it's a bit misleading to say that production of the DC-3 ended in 1942. That's just when the factory went over to military mode, supporting the war effort mode, and they actually built about 16,000 more Douglas DC-3s, but they were called the C-47. Now, there's many variants of that C-47, C-48, C-41, there's all sorts of different versions of the DC-3 in military livery and setup, but by far the most popular model was the C-47 version of the Douglas DC-3. It was effectively the same thing, just called something else and painted differently, with the differences here and there. For instance, it didn't have all the creature comforts in there. It was pretty much built to spec for whatever this branch of the military, not just the United States military, but many militaries across the world. What did they need? What did they need in it? Did they need side-mounted guns in it, for instance? Did they not need the guns? Did they need that space to carry troops or supplies or what have you? So, Douglas built the C-47 version of the DC-3 to the tune of 16,000 additional units. And I think that is awesome. They really geared up the production of the DC-3 for that C-47 variant in 1942. Could you imagine working in the factory at that time where they said, oh, we built a total of 607 aircraft. We need to build like 10 times that amount in the next couple years. It must have been crazy. So there's a side effect about this. Most remarkably, it's that around 2,000 DC-3s and its military derivatives are still in active use both commercially and privately as of 2020. Did you hear that? About 2,000 DC-3s or C-47s are still in use today. Today, 85 years after the first maiden flight in 1935. Needless to say, it is an extremely durable and resilient airframe. Think about a new car you buy that you drive off the lot, and within the first few miles, things are falling apart. Plastic bits are falling off and whatever. Airplanes are subject to the most scrutinizing maintenance programs, which is why you can have a plane like the DC-3 still flying when it is seriously 85 years old and have it be way more safe than the brand new car you're driving right now. It has been through such rigorous checks and maintenance and made so airworthy and has to pass tests annually to make sure it's airworthy. That's why an 85-year-old aircraft, if built well in the first place, like the iconic DC-3, is still used, over thousands of them still used today, 85 years later. I just think that's amazing. Over those 85 years, of course, there have been many modern modifications to these old airplanes, including more powerful engines, including turboprops. So there have been planes modified to do away with the piston engine and replace it with a more modern turboprop. Modified wing designs also to cope with that extra power. And of course, modern electronics like autopilot and what have you. While an unmodified DC-3 and C-47 could reach about 230 miles per hour, that is the original DC-3 and C-47, 230 miles an hour maximum, the turboprop version of the DC-3 airframe, which is basically just an 85-year-old airplane, but just strengthened in certain areas. The wing is changed a little bit, and it's added turboprop engines to it. It's called the Basler BT-67, and it could reach a vastly faster 328 miles per hour. That is almost exactly 100 miles per hour faster than the original version of the DC-3. The BT-67 version of the DC-3, still an 85-year-old aircraft underneath the skin, could fly 100 miles per hour faster at 328 miles per hour. That's pretty cool. The Basler BT-67 is still in operation in several countries around the world, both in military and civilian applications. And remember, the BT-67 is just a modified World War II C-47 / DC-3. That's crazy. So why is the DC-3 still used today in its original and various configurations? Well, I mentioned it earlier. Durability. You don't have an 85-year-old airplane without it being durable. Ease of maintenance. It's basically still a shade tree mechanic can work on this thing. Open up the hood of your car and see if you can work on anything. It's a computer in there, and it's all covered by plastic engine covers because they don't want you to work on it yourself in your own driveway. The DC-3 is different. Something goes wrong, you open up a hatch, an access panel, and you fix it with your muscles and with wrenches and with grease and oil. That is how easy they are to maintain. Perhaps most importantly, the DC-3 is still used today because its ability to reach remote areas with short and unpaved runways. It is still, that is to say, it's still on the short list of planes with the ability to reach those remote areas with its combination of useful payload, up to 6,000 pounds, durability, and ease of repair. Let's say you land on a really rough runway and you have to repair the landing gear. You can do that. First of all, you can actually use that dirt runway. Second of all, if something goes wrong, you can repair it relatively easily in the field. You know, there's a saying in aviation that, quote, the only replacement for a DC-3 is another DC-3. That means, back to that short list, there's not very many planes that can meet the same criteria that the DC-3 DC-3 meets: ease of repair, durability, and access to remote areas. Yes, there are planes that can access remote areas. Are they easy to repair? Are they durable? Yes and no, but none as much as the DC-3. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's pretty much the entire motto of keeping DC-3s around after 85 years. 85 years in continued active service in counting. That is not bad for the old girl. So what do you think about the DC-3? And believe me, there is so much more. And basically, I could speak for hours just going over the different variations of DC-3. There were versions of DC-3s that had sleepers, like beds up above the seats, kind of like rail cars, trains and such, because people you got to remember, back in the day when the DC-3 came out, the only real way to traverse this country from East Coast to West Coast, northern border to the Gulf of Mexico, sorry, I'm getting verklempt, was by train. People were used to these long journeys, but they were also used to having the option of a bed. 15 hours, 17 hours coast to coast, United States in a DC-3. You might want to sleep. You maybe don't need to sleep on a 6-hour flight. 15-hour flight, 17-hour flight. When's the last time you flew to Europe and you didn't take a little snooze? I don't care how hard it is to sleep on a plane. I can't really sleep on a plane that easily for many reasons. The seats are tiny, it's uncomfortable, and all the other stuff going on. But on international flights, I do fall asleep at least for 10 minutes at a time here, 20 minutes at a time there. At a certain point, you get so exhausted, you just can't keep your eyes open. On a 15-hour flight just to go from Los Angeles to New York, you're going to want to sleep. 15 hours, that's a long time. So it's cool that there were variants of the DC-3 that had sleepers. I believe the first DC-3s to roll off the assembly line for commercial use had sleepers. And the reason why I think that's cool is because I remember this is not about an airplane, but one of my fondest memories growing up, and I don't think you would ever see this happen today, but correct me if I'm wrong, old motorhomes, like Winnebagos and whatever they were called. My aunt and uncle had a Dodge motorhome, a small one. What's a small motorhome? 20 feet, 19 feet, something like that. Doesn't matter. It had like a twin bed above the cab, above the driver and passenger seat, the front driver and passenger seat. Well, the driver's always going to be in the front. There was like this overhang over the windshield with another window up there and a bed. So you could be up there and sleeping on a road trip and be just on your side looking out the front of the motorhome the entire way as you're cruising, 65 miles an hour down the interstate through the desert. It was such a cool thing. So the DC-3 sleepers, I just imagine a loud engine and kind of a little smell of oil and leather and stuff, just like an old motorhome, and sleeping and looking out the window while you're sleeping. That's a very romantic thing to me. It stirs up very fond memories of driving out to the desert with my brothers and family and aunt and uncle in that motorhome and calling dibs on that bed up there above the driver's seat. I don't know if I'll ever be on an airplane trip long enough to need a sleeper. I think in first class, and there's different kind of suites now on airplanes for these super long flights where the bed or the seat goes down flat into a bed. They have actual kind of multi-room compartments now for like $30,000 a flight, something like that, $50,000 a flight with beds. And when you're on a transatlantic flight, you just think, oh, how awesome would it be just to board the aircraft and go to sleep and then wake up and you're in London. That would be so cool. You don't have to deal with all the long flight. You just go to bed and you wake up and you're there. How wonderful would that be? It's also the reason why trains are great. I still think that trains are the way to go. Even though they are slower than airplanes, you just have so much more room to lounge in a train. You can be so much more comfortable. You can sleep all the easier. There's still sleepers in trains and Amtraks, and what other what other passenger rails are there other than Amtrak now? I don't know, but you can sleep on a train much easier. There's a little bit of a romance to these old ways of travel, and it's really cool. And it's why the DC-3, riding in a DC-3, is on my bucket list. I like old things from time to time. I like old cars. I like the way old cars smell. I like that old cars are finicky. I like that in the DeLorean, I have to treat it just right. I have to get her temperament just right, make sure she's good, that she'll get me where I need to go because she's a finicky old car. Also, finicky old cars, finicky old mechanical anything, there's not a whole lot of head scratching. You don't have to plug in a computer and figure out what part of the software went wrong. You don't need to know how to program anything. You don't need to know how to code anything to fix old things. The flip side of that is that old things do need constant maintenance. But that's part of the romance of the old thing. I would love to be around a DC-3 outside of it, firing up the engine for the first time, the puffs of smoke coming out, and the loud clatter, and the cowls open to let in as much airflow as possible and keep the engine at the right temperature. Wait for the engine to get to the right temperature. I want to see the pilot and co-pilot dialing in the throttle for the left and right engine just right so that you don't get that annoying oscillation. In modern twin prop planes, there's a button that automatically matches the RPMs between both engines, so you get much less of that annoying oscillation happening. In a DC-3, at least original versions of the DC-3, which there are many still flying today, you don't have that. You have to feel everything. You have to feel the shake in your seat, and you have to use your ears to hear. You have to use all your senses, including smell, to make sure that both engines are operating optimally and as perfectly as possible. It takes feel to get that. And too many times these days, as great as modern things are, as great as modern cars are, as great as modern airplanes are, there's something to be said for feel. I know that when I drive the DeLorean, I can feel if something's wrong in the ball of my foot. I can feel it in the ball of my foot and in the clutch. If there's something a little off, just on the calluses of the ball of my toe, I can tell that there's something wrong. If there's a little shimmy in the gas pedal that's ever so slight that I just feel in my big toe, just slightly, I know that I need to go check something. I need to check throttle linkage. I need to check whatever. I need to make sure things are balanced. I need to make sure the idle switch is working properly, that I have the idle screw set properly. I can feel all of that in my foot. In Rowdy, I can't feel any of that. Everything is, there's so much computers and circuits between me pushing down the clutch, me pushing the brake, me pushing the throttle. I'm asked to do most of those things. I'm asking the computer for permission to do those things. I'm saying, hey, computer, I request that you give the engine more gas. And then the computer says, okay, this aligns with our algorithm. We will allow more gas into the engine. Nope. With the DeLorean, I'm literally opening a throttle gate, mechanically squirting more fuel into the combustion chamber. That's what's happening, and I can feel it in my toe. That's the romance of the DC-3. Not only is it iconic and durable, it's romantic. And forgive me for being a sucker, but I like romantic things. My beautiful wife, do I like romantic things? Am I romantic?
Hopelessly.
I am a hopeless romantic, according to my wife, and I love her very much. I can tell if there's something wrong with her by the way she feels in my under my big toe. She doesn't know what I'm saying because I don't know what I'm saying. But she's an analog thing. She's not a cyborg. Are you a cyborg? Mm-hmm. Now, if there's something wrong, I gotta break out the tool kit and start working with the screwdrivers and what's wrong with your circuits, babe? It's late. I should wrap it up, huh?
Yep.
All right. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. I don't think I told you at the beginning that we are all geeks about something. Embrace your inner geek. Know that you are worthy of love, both giving and receiving love. I hope you found, even if you aren't into airplanes, I hope you found this discussion on the Douglas DC-3 fascinating. Impress your friends at the bar with your new knowledge of the DC-3. Did you know that the DC-3 could fly 240 miles per hour at a ceiling of 22,000 feet? That'll get you a free beer. What person wouldn't hear that stat and automatically think you're the coolest person that ever lived? You can thank me for that. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Like I said, you are worthy. Please believe in your own worth. I think one way that we do that is by following these geek things, by rekindling an old hobby, finding a new hobby, becoming fascinated and knowledgeable about airplanes. You'll realize little bit by little, day by day, that you are worthy of your own self-worth, that you know things, that you have things that are valuable. You pick up things that are valuable, and you can do valuable things that you learn by doing a hobby and being into geek things. So, thank you very much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. Tell your friends about it if you liked it, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Geek Therapy Radio, Saturday night at 10 on KPRC 950. Or listen anytime on our iHeartRadio app.